everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We're glad to have you here with us today. To kick us off, some housekeeping. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to share your thoughts and opinions. There's also a Q&A button. If you have any questions, please use that Q&A function to leave questions. To get us started, I'm going to introduce Shiko, who's going to be our moderator. She's an opinion columnist at Bloomberg, a journalist, writer, and editor. She'll be moderating this session today. Welcome, Shiko.
Thank you, Carmen, and thank you everyone who's joined us. So today I'm really looking forward to this discussion because we're going to take we're trying to have an optimistic view to the recent Africa report that came out on from the Economist. And just to give you a brief overview of the stories, so it was a collection of 6 stories. The first is the Africa Gap, which is really about, the continent has so much promise but is failing to deliver. One of the quotes from that article is, in most of Africa, most people are poor and productivity growth remains sluggish. The second story in the collection is the problem of productivity, which posits that Africa is undergoing social change without economic transformation. The third story in the collection is Too Many, Too Little. And this one talks about Africans are entrepreneurs because of circumstances rather than because we just have a natural entrepreneurship spirit. So a quote from that is, many of the self-employed may just be unemployed in disguise. The fourth is the business of politics. A quote from this one is, when politicians and businessmen do not keep to their lanes, it makes for the worst of both worlds, resulting in a region full of mediocre politicians and politically dependent mediocre business people. Ooh. The fifth story is Africa Alone, which talks about high debt, difficulties in businesses in accessing capital. And the sixth is called Ambition Needed, which puts together different scenarios of Africa in the future, some dire, some positive, just looking at what could happen if population growth and productivity growth go hand in hand. And just to get us started, I'll do a quick introduction of the panelists. So we have Amolo, who's the CEO of BFA Global, an impact innovation firm that combines research advisory, venture building, and investment expertise. Paul is the CEO and co-founder of Shortlist, an executive search and workforce enablement company serving high-impact sectors across the continent. Shami is the Chief Impact Officer at Harambee Youth Accelerator, a not-for-profit social enterprise that innovates solutions to address youth employment through partnerships. And finally, Michelle is the Director of Job Tech Alliance, an ecosystem building initiative focused on creating an inclusive job tech in Africa. So that's a lot, but to get us started, and we will really run this in a conversational tone. So I'll invite the panelists to, start with what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this piece?
I can dive in. I must say I read these pieces with a mixed sense of dismay and also anger. I think many of the points that they've made are fundamentally true. We have this large youth population, and we have not succeeded in 30 years of development efforts and government efforts to create meaningful, decent employment for this rising youth bulge. I think I found the tone overly pessimistic. Like this is certainly a problem, but it's a glass half empty, glass half full type of problem where we have this rising youth bulge is also energy, it's capability, it's opportunity, and we need to find solutions that work for the overall challenge and not just treat everything as a problem.
I guess for me is I guess similar to Amolo, it's the anger. I was kind of angry when I read it. I was like, we've been working in the development space for a while now. It's like, have we not moved the needle on youth employment or things like that? So I think the one statement that got me was like, by 2030, Africa will make up 80% of the world's poor. And that for me created like the urgency of like, we need to do something and we need to do it now. Clearly the things we've been working on in terms of like affordable credit, all the things like the fintechs have been working on, looking at industrialization, whatever we're doing is not working. So how can we be able to like kind of get a reset button and think of new innovative ideas to be able to be ahead of the game and not reach the 80% of the world's poor? I don't know Paul, what do you think?
I'll let Sharmi go first because she politely raised her hand.
Oh, nice.
I mean, raising my hand is one way of just claiming the attention cue. But I think for me, much like Amolo and Michelle, so I read the article. Firstly, the article came out in January, and I think the world has shifted quite significantly since then on some sort of geopolitical orders, and some of the comments, Shiko, that you flagged in terms of mediocrity of politicians and institutions and states can apply to everyone, Global South and North included. I think for me, there's three things that I wanted to emphasize in terms of my reaction to the piece, and then three things that I wanted to emphasize in terms of what I think as a response, and I can dive deeper into both. One, in terms of a reaction, I found the articles and the piece is relatively simplistic and fairly sort of paternalistic, similar to what Amalo was saying, not least because I think they provided very sort of single solution lenses to incredibly complex problems, right? And the complexity of the problems is not to take away from the fact that we might be failing at them. I think we are failing at many things, and I think that is something I agree with. But I think the issue that I wanted to call out is that this is an incredibly complex space to be working in. Firstly, Africa is, no one wants to be the handout continent, but we are definitely the legacy of, probably the most exploited continent for many reasons. And I think for us to then inherit a legacy of both exploitation on the one hand and the crossroads of where we are as a global economy in terms of, jobless growth, AI, loss of manufacturing boom, some of which they talk about, right, in the article, I think kind of erodes the complexity of where we find ourselves, plus the burgeoning population. So for me, first lens is the simplistic nature of sort of some of the, woe is Africa, Africa's not doing enough, and it's because of a lot of corrupt politicians and people who aren't trying hard enough. So that for me was problematic. But the second thing I think for me is it doesn't necessarily unpack, like it talks about specific examples, comparisons to India, comparisons to the Philippines, etc. But again, doesn't take into consideration context, time, and a whole host of other factors. I think there's two examples of where they talk about East Asia and Brazil. And the East Asia example, both in terms of manufacturing, tech boom, and Brazil in the form of large corporates. And it sort of paints this picture saying, they did it, why can't Africa? And again, misses the context, misses the point. I think the point that I will give the Brazil example is that we do need more large corporates. We do need homegrown large businesses. There's no question. But then to dismiss the context of which we find ourselves in was kind of like, again, a little bit irritating, but also, an opportunity, because I think this panel, for example, is an opportunity for us to surface those things. Then the third issue that I took with the article as well was this very simplistic approach that capitalism and the private sector alone will fix things, and the state is incompetent and corrupt and is not needed and needs to do better. I will talk about examples specifically in South Africa and in Rwanda, where we work at Harambee. I mean, you cannot solve some of these issues on the continent without state and government. And yes, there's so much imperfection, but it is a complex situation. Context is everything. Simple solutions will not suffice. And a multi-stakeholder approach is vital, because you cannot have capitalism fix a very complex, messy, inherited legacy of problems. So those are sort of my three issues with it. I'll talk about sort of the three solutions perhaps at a later point, but I can unpack later perhaps the other things and I know that Paul, for example, has some really measured and valuable thoughts on the role of SMEs versus just relying on sort of, micro enterprise for us to drive ourselves out of this poverty trap. The last thing I will say before handing over to Paul is the point that I do agree with the article, but I think it needs to be nuanced is, or one of the articles is that micro enterprise and hustling is not going to get us out of poverty. That is true. And we need to think about resilient income. We cannot hustle our way. We can't entrepreneur ourselves out of poverty and state failure and market failure. That said, it is the reality for the majority, and how to make it work for the majority is the question, rather than saying it's not going to be needed. So yeah, those are some initial thoughts and reactions, but Paul, hand over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks. And love all these comments. It's funny, I didn't respond with anger. I think it was a bit of almost relief that that there was more attention being paid to this and more of a galvanizing force around this. There was one line I pulled out, and I suspect this is a controversial line, but interesting. In terms of the great issues of the 21st century, the fact that Africans are becoming relatively poor, even as they are powering the world's population growth, ranks up there with climate change and the risk of nuclear war. It's a pretty bold statement, but given the work that I know many of us do, many of us on this call are focused on jobs, we're focused on employment, and this seems like a crushing problem that oftentimes is ignored in terms of the youth dynamics, the workforce dynamics. 11 million people enter the workforce every year for 3 million jobs. And I'm glad that articles, there's been a number of articles over the last decade. I'm thinking of the last, I think it was the last Economist report was Africa Rising. There's been the McKinsey report, like Lions on the Move. I know there's been others. Endeavor put one out a couple of years ago. Sometimes the very rosy, very optimistic pictures gives you this false sense of security, like markets will just sort themselves out. This is great. I'm happy to hear Africa is on a great trajectory. Nothing to see here. Let's move right along. Markets and capitalism are great. And I think that those of us who are close to the problem realize, like, yeah, markets and capitalism can play a role here, but we also do need focus. We need intentionality. We need planning. We need thoughtfulness about economic structures. And I do think that I appreciated that they had multiple ideas, but like we've all said, it's not simple. And there is no silver bullet. I think that for those, there are a lot of people like to look at, say, the East Asia manufacturing miracle and be like, hey, great, cool. What is Africa's East Asian manufacturing miracle? And as we all know, Africa is not one market. It's at least 54 markets, probably many, many more than that. And I think those of us who are in this business all believe, or most of us believe, we won't stumble on something like manufacturing and then be like, oh, great, yeah, it should be manufacturing. If there is an answer like manufacturing, I think it's probably the green economic transition and the potentials around a carbon reduction, but I don't believe that's going to be the single answer. And I think instead, all of us are working on many, many possible partial answers. We need government, we need policy, we need innovation. We need a lot of things. And I appreciated that the article pointed towards some things that are worth learning more about, researching more. One of the things we've noted in our work is that many of us in this industry are often flying blind. There isn't data on a lot of things, particularly around workforce demand, labor demand. If you are going to be preparing young people for jobs of the future, what are the jobs of the future? How many are there? Where are they? So I appreciated some of the sort of pushes and data around agriculture, foreign direct investment. I do really appreciate the piece on growing businesses and not just small and micro enterprises. I spent most of my career in microfinance. I deeply believe in the importance of finance for livelihoods and a very small scale household level micro entrepreneurship. But I believe that we might have a problem of going too far towards promoting and perpetuating almost like survival micro entrepreneurship in place of supporting growing firms. So I know that at Shortlist, we're really interested in what are the ways we take those thousands, tens of thousands of organizations that are under 5 employees and get them to 20 employees. Won't work for everyone, but if we did that on the scale of hundreds of thousands of small enterprises, we have something that's exciting. I probably should have led with this. I also read this very much with a lens towards jobs. And I think that's true of multiple of us on this panel. The economists, by their nature, they focus very much on GDP and GDP growth. I don't really care about GDP growth. I care about GDP growth to the extent that it creates economic opportunity in places that are needed, and sometimes those are correlated. But very much looking at this through the lens of jobs. As I was reading this, as I was thinking about some of the things that we might respond. So I was kind of motivated and galvanized a bit by this, but also want to resist simplistic silver bullet solutions and know there's a lot of texture here.
And this is actually a great place to segue into the next question, because it seems the argument is always Africa is rising or Africa is tanking, but there's not, that nuance is missing. And so I would love for the panelists, just reflecting on the work you're doing, bring in for us what are these sectors that are growing, and bring in for us the nuance, the country specific, as you said, 54 nations, as I said, 54 nations, but Africa is always looked at as this one thing where there's, it's just this huge monolith. So I'd love to hear from the panelists on like sector specific opportunities and what you've seen that's working. And then some more context.
I can go to quite a fresh and relevant subject for us, and maybe some context as to what we do at Harambee. So Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator works in South Africa and in Rwanda. We'd love to work in other African countries, perhaps through others, not necessarily operationally, but and maybe some context. We started off as a skilling organization, and we quickly realized, and we did skill for jobs of today with inclusive opportunities and focusing on dropping that existed today, especially given South Africa's unemployment rate. But we quickly realized that it was completely insufficient for us to focus on jobs of today. We had to create jobs of tomorrow. So while we have a big track record in inclusive matching and inclusive jobs, we had to focus on inclusive job growth. And 2 or 3 we worked on quite extensively with the government of South Africa to partner and amplify and grow were the global business services sector and digital. We're trying to do more now in green that Paul has mentioned, agri and a few others as well. But I'll talk about both the capabilities that allowed us to grow some sectors and the things that I think we need to be looking at in terms of sector growth, for especially jobs for young people. So a couple of points of context. One, we did some analysis over the past 15 years in South Africa. Since 2008, GDP has been growing sluggishly, not enough. Jobs have grown, jobs for non-youth have commensurately grown, again, not enough. But the assumption that GDP grows, jobs will come, and youth jobs will come is misguided. So what we've seen is does not always correlate to job growth. And when it does correlate to job growth, it largely correlates to adult job growth, or rather above 35 job growth. Young people have not benefited from GDP growth, especially in many global South countries, particularly in South Africa. But surprise, surprise, guys, this is coming soon to a theater near you, because this is likely to be the trend globally, is what the ILO forecasts in terms of jobless growth and youth not benefiting. Now, you can be speculative in terms of why. This is because, firstly, we have a higher youth population. Young people are not ready for the jobs that are coming in. There could be active biases, discrimination, barriers, etc. But the truth remains, we have a high young population and not enough jobs and not enough job growth. So when we looked at sectors that were possibly potential sectors that could A, absorb young people, and B, were growing almost counter-cyclically, those were the sectors we ended up focusing on. So that was global business services, which I'll give you an example. Even in COVID, grew 24% compound average growth rate per year, compared to any other sector, finance and business services, or wholesale and retail. Wholesale and retail, in fact, lost jobs and lost jobs for young people. So there's different sort of strategies that are required there. But we focused on sectors that are growing and sectors that could absorb young people. And then we said, can we help grow these sectors collaboratively with government and bring new jobs into South Africa, which is what we did since 2000, specifically since sort of 2012. And over the past several years, what we've realized is we can, the partnerships that I mentioned, government, private sector, and social sector, are vital. You can't do this alone. So Harambee noticed that the global business services industry had an industry body. We then kind of bolstered that industry body with investment, with secondment, with support. And the industry body then now attracts new jobs into the country. Their job is to market the country and to bring investors and bolster investor confidence, which in the form of BPESA, we did in South Africa. We're doing that now in Rwanda as well. I'm the board chair of the equivalent entity in Rwanda. And this creates new jobs in sectors that are growing. And importantly, the government plays a role, because you can then suggest to the government, what are the incentives that can draw more investors to come into the country? And can you incentivize them to hire young people, which we then did. So we have incentives outlined in, for example, the sector master plan in South Africa to help drive both investment, but also hiring young people. So those are sort of 2 or 3 examples. I mean, we've now, of the 1.4 million opportunities that we've enabled in South Africa, 8% are net new jobs. And the majority of those net new jobs are for young people. And we're doing the same in Rwanda. And can we do this across the continent? Possibly, but scale is complex and difficult. But so those are sort of some examples of things that Harambee has done in terms of net new job creation with the sector lens, but I'll let the others weigh in.
I could respond to a couple things Sharmi said, because I love those comments. I think that the dynamic of jobless growth is something I think we're fascinated about, and it's kind of what I was referring to with the GDP can grow but not create jobs. I think that there's a few things that are raising that specter and concern, of course. Even in the article, they mentioned that the best performing factories, I think this was in Tanzania, the best performing factories are the ones that are most using automation and have the fewest people. That's a bit scary that like in cases like that, you might have GDP growth and productivity at odds with hiring people. That's not great. I think AI is the other thing that we spend a lot of time thinking about and are very nervous about. I think, if you think about what jobs are going to be most exposed to, AI agents, it's going to be those that you can do sitting in front of your computer wherever they are. And I do think it's coming soon for customer service jobs and a lot of the remote work. The question and the hope is, do new opportunities, do new tasks, do new jobs spring out of that? And we'll see. But right now, I'm nervous that we're about to see a generational dividing line where if you kind of got into the job market and into a function and skill set early enough, you're safe and you're going to be juiced and your productivity is going to rise and you're going to accelerate because you get AI agents helping you. And if you didn't get in time, you're 20 right now. Are you just being replaced? And I will say on our recruiting side of the business, we are absolutely seeing companies drastically cut hiring plans for entry-level staff because they're finding they can use AI in place of where they could use entry-level staff. So we're still hopeful about digital jobs. I agree with everything Sharmi said. We're doing some work around digital jobs, and I think that the task in front of us is to figure out like beyond the ones that already exist, the sectors in BPO and global business services. What are the other jobs that are susceptible to being done remotely, particularly as more and more demographies, economies around the world are struggling with aging populations? How do we like take over and remotify more of particularly the high value jobs that exist around the world? But I think as the firm Shortlist Futures, the side that focuses more on jobs and workforce, we're really focused on in real life, IRL jobs. And I'll mention a couple of angles. The biggest, of course, is green economy. The biggest hope I have, and I'm certainly not alone, there's many people that will trot out similar ideas. Biggest hope I have is that even though Africa only produces about 3% of global emissions, the hope is that Africa's combination of renewable energy potential, natural resources, and labor, biggest workforce in the world, or soon to be, can power essentially the answer to the world's climate crisis. Because if you do have if you combine the proximity of bauxite reserves to geothermal to then smelt aluminum, like instantly you've turned something that's a huge carbon emitter and made it easier. Or if you think about like locating more carbon and energy intensive activities, even crypto mining, or certainly direct air capture for carbon, you could imagine a not so scientific, sci-fi version of the future where, you have renewable powered versions of all of this happening in Africa. There are steep challenges to that happening, and there's inconsistencies about which jobs will be created in which of these sectors. We published a report last year forecasting green jobs that did take a look at like where might be the subsectors that are creating the most jobs, particularly in the near term. Spoiler alert, renewable energy, particularly solar, is driving that. We're also just at the early stages of looking more seriously at labor migration. And it's a controversial topic. Brain drain's a real thing. But I think, if you look at things like home care aides, nurses, trades positions, there are interesting dynamics and statistics, particularly from Philippines, that, once you get this engine going, for every one person in the Philippines, for example, that left the country to go take a nursing job, 9 additional people were trained, and you actually added to the human capital kind of baseline because there was then this pull that was generating more interest in this and building up skill sets. I keep thinking about the fact that foreign direct investment's pretty low in Africa. I mean, I think it's 50 billion or something. Remittances are at least double that, if not more. And so you think about where do foreign currency reserves, where does money come in? So we're very early there, and that one's controversial, and we have mixed feelings about it. But we are thinking about that as an answer to some of the jobs issues.
I can go next. So as a Job Tech Alliance, we're thinking about what are the jobs for the future, which sometimes we believe that job tech is the future of work. And the reason why is from research we've done, it shows that by 2030, there's going to be as many as 88 million Africans who are deriving part of their income from digital work. So how do we ensure that the work that is coming is offering quality work? Because I think even with my colleagues here, is like, what's more important for us, not just a job, but people earning, but like, are you actually able to have a living income? Showcasing that. But however, the sector itself is challenging. So I think similar to the journey that Shami had, we had the same one when we started the Job Tech Alliance 3-4 years ago. We were like, oh, let's go out and find out digital platforms that enable people to earn income. We found some platform, but some of them like was struggling a lot. Like, how do you get new companies? How do you get the demand for new jobs? Even thinking about global migration, like how are you able to support it? So we changed our strategy and said, okay, let's focus on where are the jobs going to come from? What's the demand for jobs for the next 10 years? Then focus on the platforms that enable that. We did a piece on it, and we came up with like about 10 industries. Some of them, Paul and Shami have talked about. Of course, migration is one of them, and we hold the same position as like, how do you ensure that it's actually working well? We've also talked about green jobs. The other industry we have not said in this call is like even creative industry. It's a potential one. We have seen how big the creative industry is in Nigeria. Like, can we be able to ensure that like that creates more jobs for Africa? Right now, we see that there are approximately like 2.4 million people in the creative industry in Africa. Are we able to ensure like that's a potential way to actually earn income, leverage AI to be able to have more people? We've seen influencers being big, movies being there, the musicians, like, are we able to actually continue to grow that work? The other also sector we're seeing continuing to grow is kind of like the agent networks, especially with the lens like AI might come to deal things. There are some businesses which I think will always be in person and in real life. Agent network is one of them. In Africa, we're very relationship-based. I'm likely to buy something from somebody I know or see as compared to online. And that I think will still stay for a while. So is there a potential opportunity to be able to see that either from DFS structure, but also like social commerce and e-commerce model with agent models being part of it? Like, we see that as potential big opportunities. Micro enterprises, I know the article talked about many businesses, too little businesses, but is there actually potential? We see huge potential of looking at, for example, like e-commerce, migrating and sharing like these micro enterprises. Are you able not just only to sell to your next door neighbor, but also be able to sell to the next country or even the next town, and increasing your demand? Because we truly believe that if by generating demand for their goods or services, then you unlock more jobs in this other end as well. Yeah, and that's kind of like the last one, I think, is what also Paul talked about, kind of like outsourcing. Are we able to have like people living in Kenya or Africa and be able to work for companies in the global north? Recognizing, yeah, it's the aging population in the global north. Are we able to kind of create opportunities for that for the labor markets in Africa as well?
So let me maybe jump in here with a point about credit. One of the things that stuck out to me in the article was this graph that showed that available finance is a major obstacle for people who are trying to grow their business. And while that's a concern all around the world, and especially in the small and medium businesses, it's particularly stark and painful in Africa. And I would say it's painful to me because I've spent 15 years trying to work on financial inclusion, which we tended to think about at the small retail, individual, or micro business level. But we really need major overhaul to the way financial markets are able to support the growth of businesses. And at the same time, acknowledging that generally cash alone is not enough. Most businesses need other forms of support, including identifying good, reliable, dependable people to hire. We've seen that in our research that entrepreneurs are scared of hiring people because they don't know that they'll be reliable and dependable. So I think we're still looking at a combination, as Shami said. It's not only, obviously, if the private sector were going to solve this, they would have solved it already. There's an opportunity that is waiting for a solution that probably is going to require some combination of government intervention, subsidy, whether from government or philanthropic support, and creative private investors and impact investors to really generate the business activity. I think I take some heart from the large number of Africans who think they want to start a business. 20% of them are probably right and have all the personality attributes to really succeed. And we need to do better at identifying which are those 20% and really supporting them with a wider range of support, including different types of credits. So, I mean, I think this is something, as a company, BFA, we have been working in this field for nearly 20 years, and we will definitely be continuing. And if we get these combination of multiple actors working, I think there's a lot of pent-up ability in most, if not all, African markets.
And Amolo, I actually want to build on something you've said. You started talking about what you're optimistic about, and I would love to hear what are some of those things that are making you optimistic. So maybe, as you've said, it might be, the continent is entrepreneurial, maybe just 20% of those businesses will be good, but that is already a sign of good things. So I'd love to hear from all the panelists what you think, what are you
Yeah,
most
maybe
about?
I mean, you did sort of summarize. I think there's the same underlying factors that are the problem are also the source of the solution. And then we have to work across the board to make sure that what we get out of it is on the high potential side, and we can jump out of the low potential trap that we're currently struggling in.
Can I jump in, Shiko, before answering your question? Because I wanted to comment and add to something Amolo said about entrepreneurs and funding and constraints of capital. Because capital is actually not the constraint, despite capital is the constraint, but it is also not the constraint on some level. And I think fundamentally, there's this assumption that, magically businesses will grow, but they don't. And I mean, I love this economist, Mariana Mazzucato, who talks often about the infrastructure that was state funded that allowed Apple to build its iPhone, right? That was whatever, it was GPS or touchscreen technology that was funded by, government spending in the trillions. We don't have that equivalent. We actually have never built. So on one level, you're right, capital is a constraint for entrepreneurs on the ground, and there's a high failure rate, et cetera. But I think there's a more fundamental constraint that I think we need to be examining, which is, what are the infrastructure capabilities? And I'm not talking just roads and bridges that allow for us to innovate. And that is missing. And I think that it is a failure of imagination, not necessarily just of capital. And I'll give examples. South Africa on the African continent loves to be vilified, but it is also a possibility of what can happen when you have state funding and a reasonably large private sector to innovate, right? Like, you can actually build an infrastructure upon which to build other businesses. And I think for me, that is something that we need to think about as Africans in Africa, because we're not doing enough of that. We're not building the GPS that allows the Uber to exist. We are still thinking an Uber will magically come up. It won't. And you need the infrastructure, from the GPS to the financing system to the whole host of things. So I just wanted to comment on that point, because I think it requires for us to think dramatically differently in terms of what our infrastructure is and what the constraints really are, and to pick a lane and to focus on that. And I'm not in the space of SMEs and innovative financing, but I think that's something that is sorely missing. But then in terms of, Shiko, your question on what's optimistic, what could be, I think people are going to need Africa and Africans, I think, for the reasons that have been outlined, whether it's young people, energy, innovation. I mean, I'll give 2 examples. The industries that we're close to in terms of whether even contact center and service support, et cetera. I'll never forget, I had an interaction with a young Rwandan woman who, for all intents and purposes, in a sort of like a, outsourcing job, working late shifts, et cetera. We had to convince her parents that she wasn't, in a dodgy job because she's working late nights, et cetera. But I remember sitting next to her after she had handled a call with some customers in Canada, an elderly couple, and it was sort of, I think it was a ticketing issue and they really struggled. She's bilingual. She moved into French and English quite quickly. Then she solved this problem. And she turned to me afterwards. She said, I had such a great sense of pride to be able to solve problems for people. And she was able to do that with empathy, with pride, with sort of, and I think that these are qualities that our young people have in spades. And our young people are ready and willing and able to do these kinds and other kinds of jobs, because we just have the drive right now, and we have the energy and we have the numbers. And so I think from I know it's a little bit of a touchy-feely example, but I think that is a quality that will hold us in good stead. Paul and Michelle referred to labor market mobility. There are some really interesting solutions out there in terms of offering, cross-border migration in a safe, non-exploitative way, where young people can solve the demographic challenge, where you have an aging global north and a young and willing population in the global south, in a way that hopefully can benefit us as well. So those are sort of a couple of things that give me, sort of optimism and hope. And I will say that I think the moment that we're in, despite the crises and the political, turmoil globally, I think is an opportunity. It's a window. And every crisis is a window of opportunity for us to reinvent what it means to sort of reimagine the world order on some level, whether it is sort of decarbonization, whether it is sort of like more trade independence, et cetera, and figuring out what we can do locally with our markets. And I think that is a source of opportunity, not least because we have the demographics and the drive of the young people in Africa, who I think can help drive towards a solution. So those are some sort of causes for me to be optimistic, despite the fact that the numbers are pretty bleak.
I could pick up on a couple of those things and also talk a little bit of the optimism. I love that Amalo mentioned these small businesses need more than money, and in fact, many times they don't even need money. And I'm shocked by the number of times people seem to think that a loan to a small business is the one-size-fits-all thing that will help these small businesses grow. Before doing Shortlist, I was an impact investor investing in fintech startups, and we started Shortlist in large part because we realized, in some respects, money was the easy part. Like, we'd make investments in these companies, and then it's like we'd show up at the first board meeting, and they had no idea how to assemble the team that they needed to execute against these ambitious plans. So I'll mention a couple of examples that give me some hope. Like one is just the opportunities to try to supply more efficient human capital to these businesses. We ran a program a few years ago in Kenya called the Kenya Small Business Leader Program, where we basically asked 20 women-owned SMEs, what do you most need to grow? And we asked actually probably 200 what they most need to grow. And very few of them said money. Most of them said, I'm really stuck with some specific thing I can't get over the hump of. I'm trying to go online with my business. I just really don't know the first way to like set up an e-commerce portal or something like that. And what we did is just found and matched them to local experts on the topic that could just easily navigate them through the topic. And lo and behold, like the vast majority of these companies instantly and quickly grew for very little money. I think we gave stipends to these experts to support. And now 4 years later, we've checked back, and it's some very significant percentage are still working with these experts in a totally unpaid capacity. So I think there's like latent, untapped human capital that can be put to work to these ambitious firms that want to grow. And not everyone wants to grow. There's reasons that some firms prefer to stay almost under the radar, but there's a lot that want to grow and that we can help them. The other thing we've been working on is we've been running talent programs trying to channel young people into clean energy and climate jobs over the last 7 years. I think we've put about 8,000 young people into first jobs in the climate space. But our programs, given their structure, often support bigger employers, the sexy venture-backed Sun Kings and M-Copas and all of these. As we went out to the smaller businesses, the local ones, the under the radar, haven't received funding, and asked them like what would you need to create more jobs? You're employing 20 people today. What would it take to get you to 50? We've been shocked that the number of firms that have great ideas for how they could rapidly expand their workforces and grow and develop their business. But oftentimes what they're missing is just a little bit of experimental support, a little bit of help to try to prove out a concept. We've been working with one firm in Ethiopia that runs a biodigester, biofuels business, and he's like, look, I've got my sources; they're a bit unreliable. I'm pretty confident that with a little bit of support, I could get unemployed rural women to find me the stuff I need and bring it, and I'd work out a deal with them. But I just need I don't have any time in the day. I'm a small business owner, and I just need some help figuring out how that would work, a little bit of money to make it work. The pilot employed 100 people. He's now expanded it to 300 people with no subsidy. And it's a template that we can bring to similarly situated companies across the continent. So I think we also underestimate like how little it can take to unlock the creative ideas at the grassroots of these businesses, because many of them, not all of them, many of them got into owning a business and starting a business because they wanted to grow. They wanted to create local economic opportunity. They wanted to create jobs. So it's a shame that oftentimes we approach things one size fits all. I've got other things I'm optimistic about, but I'll stop there for now.
It feels like I can just say, like Paul, to make it easier. Some of the things that Paul and Shami have mentioned resonate really well with the JobTech Alliance. Similar to what Paul has mentioned, when we started accelerating some of the companies in our venture support, they actually valued more the technical assistance than the grant, because that's where the gap was. They're like, yeah, I need somebody to help me think through my commercial strategy. I need someone to help me to think through like financial modeling. And we're saying like that's kind of more needed. And I think even as we're thinking about evolving our support, is like, can we be able to support like fractional people, that fractional support, or like fractional CMO or a CFO that a platform can be able to support. The other things I think I'm optimistic about, I guess one is on funding as well. We have seen in countries, for example, like Ethiopia, where they're not able to get like VC funding, actually starting to grow sustainable business, because they know from day one they're not able to get money or raise a fund. It's like, are we able to support it? And I think that's kind of like what we're trying to push for a lot of our platform, is like thinking about how are you able to kind of become profitable from like day one, as compared to like how can we be able to actually raise money to be able to support that. Granted that like, yeah, labor and capital is important, but I think recognizing that. And also some of the things we've recognized as a JobTech Alliance is the hunger of entrepreneurs trying to learn from each other. There's very little communities where people are actually able to sit down and talk about their failures, what they've grown and learned. And like the JobTech Alliance, we realized like by creating that whole community, people are able to have an opportunity for people to learn and then not make the same mistakes. I think right now, if you ask in Africa, it's like, how did you get a business? They said, I think in Kenya, there's a statement, it's God, so that you're not asking any more questions. But is there an opportunity for us to continue to learn from each other so that we can continue to grow? Not just only from the success stories, but also some of the failure stories, so that we're able to continue to have that as well.
Awesome.
And maybe following on that comment and Shami's last opening point about the investment that governments in other countries made in some of the underlying technology. I mean, I think the good news is, to a large extent, that same investment is available to us. We don't have to necessarily start from the beginning. But where we're able to pick it up, I think that the power of some of these communities of practice, we've certainly seen in Kenya, the existence of M-Pesa has enabled multiple different business model innovation. And the fact that people are all together in one location enables kind of the whole Silicon Savannah narrative, but which is not just a narrative, which is also true, that people who are able to learn from each other and build on each other's successes are really able to develop a community. And I think one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is how can we really make 1 and 1 more than just 2? Like, we don't attempt to have single unitary businesses and each trying their best in some totally new market, but to really capitalize on where there's already investment and innovation and opportunity, and can that grow up in different ways, and it'll be different in every country and every market. But I think that opportunity and governments are investing in it with various tech hubs and model towns and so on. I expect that there's much more that ideally we should be doing, but I think there's quite a bit that we can already do by marshaling our resources into some set of clusters or sectors.
Thank you. And I'll
I love
jump
that.
oh, sorry.
I might share just one more thing that hasn't come up much, but that we have some optimism about, but also some abject terror, and that is AI. I'm mostly, and everyone on this call knows, I'm mostly scared of AI and what it might do to jobs. But I think there's a positive potential for Africa's young population, where there is some evidence to suggest that AI can be a great leveler. In other words, like, there's some evidence that in many digital functions, it can take someone who's starting off inexperienced or relatively mediocre at a particular function or job and very quickly level up to best in the world. And that the people who are already best in the world actually don't get that much benefit from using it. Now, there is some data in some functions that's the total opposite. So I think, obviously, like a lot of things with AI, remains to be seen. But I have some optimism that particularly if people can start to not necessarily go through AI training, because I'm not sure this is something you go into training on, but if people can start to get creative and learn themselves how to use AI to do things better, faster, cheaper, there is an opportunity playing on a global digital playing field and labor market that people could start to create a really exciting future for themselves. So I think that's something we've just launched a fund with Gates Foundation to look at positive use cases of generative AI to create more economic opportunity, particularly among women. And so we're going to be looking at a variety of ways that Gen AI may improve access to markets, access to capital, access to knowledge, trying to promote those outcomes. So let's see. That could go either way, but right now I'm trying to stay optimistic.
Awesome. And I see we have some questions that have come through from the audience. So I'll just read through them quite quickly and give an opportunity for the different panelists to address one or two, given the time we have. So one from Mon is, what impact are incubators and accelerators having on the small business ecosystem? Is it adding value, or is the model broken? Catherine has two questions. One is on skills and education. Is there a mismatch between the skills young people are acquiring and the demands of the job market? And if so, how can we fix it? And then Catherine also has a question on technology and the future of work. What policies should we put in place to ensure automation and AI don't displace more jobs than they create? So let's start with those, then we can take the next ones as a batch.
I'm happy to take the skills and AI question one version. Skilling, we have some strong views about skilling as Harambe. I think we have to, this is my personal philosophy, but I think learning and education has to be lifelong, but skilling has to be short, sharp, efficient, and in response to demand. There is no question that we are in an outdated skilling and credentialing system. We cannot wait years and years for young people to get skilled into jobs that will change. I mean, we're literally seeing that with AI right now, and which is why the 2 points are kind of related. You probably, even if you took courses 2 or 3 years ago in some of the work in AI and digital, et cetera, it's going to be outdated now, and AI can probably do it faster than you can learn faster. But I think there are ways in which you can, so firstly, I think our skilling systems need to be incentivized to be demand-led and incredibly rapid and turn young people around for work. That is not the purpose of education. Education is for lifelong citizenship and learning, and that is the work of skilling has to be very differentiated from the work of education, something that is very important to outline. But we have a crisis now where we have lots of young people and lots of money being spent on thinking that, you can prepare young people with 3-year degree courses that are going to be outdated in 2 months. So that needs to shift dramatically. And I think governments and private sector need to be very targeted on point investments in that direction to shift that. On the AI question, I am also optimistic. I didn't mention this before, but I do think that and the ILO has a couple of papers on this, but I think there are going to be 3 economies of the future. There are going to be many, many sort of sectors and other kinds of things. There's the care economy, the digital economy, the green economy. And these aren't like sectors, but these are economies, and they have value chains that encompass manufacturing and a whole host of other things. But these are needs, and the ILO has, much more eloquent and good data to back this up, to showcase that these are going to be jobs that will grow and will be needed no matter what. And so I think in terms of AI, we are not going to supplant the needs for human beings. It's a question of how we use both our skilling systems on the one hand, our capital and investment systems on the other, and to shape the work that we can do as humans. We work extensively in the contact center industry, which allegedly is supposed to be impacted by AI. It isn't yet. Customer service agents are using AI to become better customer services agents. They aren't being wiped out quite yet. They may be wiped out. A percentage of the jobs, both a percentage of the jobs and a percentage of the tasks will change. But I think it is about companies and organizations, industries change and plan for skilling that would take, be responsible.
I could just respond to the skills education one, just to pick up where Sharmi left. I don't think there's so much a mismatch as much as kind of missing almost the role of classroom education and how that relates to on-the-job training. I think that more than I've ever seen before, the way the kind of like philanthropic and development industrial complex around workforce development has emerged. It's so oriented towards like a train and pray solution. Like, what's the cheapest way we can pass someone through some certificate course, and then cool, they're trained, surely they'll find a job. It's not the way that the labor market works. And I'd ask everyone to reflect on the call, how many of you went to school for something such that the day you walked into your job, you were awesome at it day one. I know I, for one, studied philosophy and psychology, and then went in my first job as an advertising account executive. No relevance at all. You learn on the job. I think what we have is an underinvestment in on-the-job experience and work experience. And I'd love to see the workforce development world, even the education/skilling sectors, start to think about subsidizing first jobs, apprenticeships, work experience as a critical missing piece of the equation. And, I don't know about all of you, but most of my experience and most of the situations we work in, because we run a variety of first job programs, it really is that first work experience that you get to practice whatever that classroom thing was that you learned. You absorb how to show up as a professional, how to work in teams, like soft skills that are notoriously difficult to learn through classroom. And frankly, the credential of having had a job is often the one thing that employers are looking for. And I'll say that with our recruiting hat on. Like very many people don't want to take a chance on someone who's never had a job before, because they know, just like I was an idiot when I showed up at my first job. You don't want to go through the first 6 months of teaching someone how to show up on time, how to write emails, how to navigate like professional calendars, like what to wear to meetings, things like that. So I do think it's not so much a mismatch such as we've almost got it backwards. We're training and praying that they find something. I think Sharmi and Harambe are leaders in this in terms of being demand-led. Like, figure out what the job is and trust this talent, and that like it will find a way to get ready for that job and fill it if we can create the job, if we can create the demand and the pull for talent.
Maybe I can answer the question about accelerators and incubators. And we run several of them as BFA Global. So therefore, I'm obviously not going to say that they're, I don't know what I can't remember what the question said, but are they broken? But I do think they're not as effective in general as they could or should be if the other parts of the system were working better. So selecting the people who are really appropriate for that accelerator, connecting them to other services, to credit, to markets. I think we expect accelerators to just solve the full market problem, but the full market problem is still there. So it is, and in a way, that's one of the problems that all businesses in Africa face. I have a friend who was running a Pizza Hut or some chain restaurant in Kenya, and he said, I have 57 suppliers in Kenya. But when I ran my Pizza Hut in the US, I just call up the restaurant supply store and I get everything I need. So the fact that there are many, many parts of the market that are not working is something every entrepreneur has to solve. And accelerators and incubators can help, but they are not going to guarantee success for anyone who joins them.
I can answer Chris' last question asking about, are there organizations that focus on AI coaches being developed for different industries, job roles, etc.? I think my answer is like, yes, we're actually testing out something right now with a company in Rwanda on how are you able to use AI as a coach for the sales industry? Because we know sales is one of the aspects that everyone needs in different sectors. It's like, are you able now to be trained on sales through an AI agent or an AI coach? I think that's kind of like where we see the next level of how AI can play in upskilling in this future work model, because I think, as both of them have mentioned, both Shami and Paul, is like we've recognized that the education system is not enough, but also that it's very expensive for companies and platforms to do upskilling, right? So is there a way we can be able to use AI to actually reduce the cost of upskilling so that it's more affordable, both for the participant, but also for the company itself? So we definitely see that as a great opportunity. So, and I guess we'll share the results once it's out in a couple of months.
Awesome. And there's one other question. I'll read it out. It's okay. This is from Chris. He says, many of the examples seem to be more bottom-up ways to grow jobs. Thank you. But can the experts understand macro nuances? Can the experts who understand macro nuances also speak more to countrywide or scaled interventions, perhaps intersections of grassroots with enabling environments, policy advocacy, or industry investments? For example, any research or statistics that demonstrate distinction of jobless growth versus inclusive economic growth efforts. And I'll open it to any panelist who has strong thoughts on this one.
I'm happy to take a crack at it. I mean, we operate at the national level now, in South Africa at least, and in Rwanda, but some of our interventions have been at the policy level. Specifically, for example, in GBS, I'll give a Global Business Services example, sorry to overuse it, but we co-designed a national incentive for foreign investors to come in to set up shop in South Africa, country competitively, and then secondly, to hire young people. It's very tricky. It's not an easy thing. Macroeconomic stuff is very hard to do. It's easy to sort of scale up a product rather than to solve a national problem and solve the system. But it is actually the scale intervention that will allow for the thousands of jobs to come. We are trying to do that in some other way, in some other industries right now. Tourism being another example. We are doing a study right now to look at how the electronic travel authorization, I mean, everyone loves to hate on South African visas, but electronic travel authorization, just changing the quantum of arrivals from certain markets has a direct impact on the kind of jobs. And so what are the levers? I guess the question that I would ask, and I don't know much about the macroeconomics necessarily, the question I would ask people in this space is, what are the levers, if applied to a sector or an industry, if unlocked, or it could be used to unlock job growth? That is directly the thing that could be done to allow for job growth at scale versus an incremental approach in terms of trying to get 1,000 jobs, 10,000 jobs, etc. This is now about the hundreds of thousands of jobs. So those are some of the questions. I don't have all of the answers, but that's some examples.
Perfect. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone. I know in the interest of time, we're right on the hour. So I just wanted, I don't think I can do justice to try and summarize everything we've said in this wonderful discussion. I think the big thing was, context was missing. The stories have clearly sparked discussion, but a lot of context was missing. A lot of complexities were not understood. And there was a very generalized approach to some of these topics that are clearly very interesting. But as a parting shot, I just wanted to ask each of the panelists to give us your one-sentence parting shot Yes, and then we can be able to wrap up the call. And thank you everyone for joining.
Africa is the future of jobs.
Love it.
And there's no silver bullet to getting jobs.
Good one.
Yeah.
Africa has to be the future of jobs, or else it'll be a challenging time.
I feel like everyone stole my points, but yes, Africa is the future of jobs, and we need all of the solutions, not just a single one. So take them all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you so much to the audience for this discussion. And I hope this continues in other forums, whether it's online. This was just the beginning, but I hope this sparks a lot of discussion from these topics.
Yeah.
Thank you.